Well, there's a lot of unknowns here because you're dealing with Russia, a country that doesn't really have the rule of law. So we don't think that there's going to be any kind of a fair trial ahead. In fact, even if Griner was acquitted, the Russian government could decide to go against this ruling and put her in prison. It could be up to 10 years, but honestly, it could be more. And we know that already she's been facing abuses to her human rights just getting to the court, which is a 5-hour round trip trek. She's been placed in sort of a small cage, according to her wife, back in the U.S. So there's a lot of unknowns. There's the possibility that there could be some sort of hostage swap, but that was actually only coming from the Russian side. We hadn't heard anything specifically about this from the U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken said that they absolutely will bring her home. But of course, at the same time, the U.S. is trying to be measured because if they put too much publicity on this case, it will make it seem that this is something that the Russians should do, and this plays into the Russians' hands. But by not putting enough attention on this, of course, is creating some outrage about the double standards here, because Brittney Griner is one of the best female basketball players of all time. Would this really be happening if it were a male basketball player? So there is a lot of issues going on, a lot of unknowns, and it's very difficult to predict when dealing with the Russian legal system.
What are the possible scenarios going forward? Do you think the verdict is a foregone conclusion?
Well, we already see that she's been arrested for drug trafficking when she didn't have any large consumption of or large drugs on her. There was just some kind of paraphernalia. And it seems that the Russian government wants to use her as an example in order to get a hostage back, a hostage swap, or to exact some other type of concession from the U.S. So we're not really dealing with the regular legal system that you might think of where you follow the processes and there are rules that are predictable. Everything is incredibly arbitrary, so that makes it difficult to predict. But the U.S. is insistent that they're going to find a way to get her back. So it is possible that they could make some sort of exchange, but we haven't heard any specifics from the U.S. government on how this is going to happen.
Can you tell us more about that? What are the chances of a prisoner swap? There's some talk of an exchange for an arms dealer held in the US, or is that just purely from the Russian side?
So that is from the Russian side. We haven't heard about this. The arms dealer, Victor Bout, that is the one arms dealer that they're referring to. But this only really plays into Russia's hands. This would be a huge win for Russia. And I think the U.S. is trying to negotiate without having to swap Victor Bout, who's a notorious arms dealer, for Griner, who had done really nothing wrong. So I think that they might try another route. But again, it's just so murky because these types of situations, it's very difficult to predict what the Russians are going to do.
Are there previous similar cases that Griner's case can be compared to?
Well, there are many different cases like this that have taken place, not just with the U.S. dealing with Russia, but many Western countries dealing with authoritarian regimes that may have overly strict laws or arbitrary laws where they have to deal with some kind of either prisoner switch or hostage swap, or try to give some sort of deal that then leads to a reduced sentence or an early release. And typically, Western governments don't like to engage in this, but sometimes they're forced to. Their hands are forced to. And we've seen prisoner swaps have happened, hostage swaps have happened actually many times in the past. But again, this plays into the autocrats' hands more so than the West, because they're then having to make, the West is then having to make concessions that they really, really did not want to have to make.
And what do we know about the treatment of Brittney Griner since she's been detained? What have her family said?
Well, those that have seen her in person said that she's doing as well as possibly, could be expected. She's been detained over 120 days. But as I mentioned, her wife said that she's been treated terribly in terms of getting her to the actual court because she's confined into such a small space to do so. And it's such a long trip to get there. Otherwise, it seems like she's in reasonably good health. But prison rights, or the rights of those detained in Russia, would differ from the standards that you might have in Western countries. So there's always concerns that she's dealing with psychological abuse, and these are really difficult conditions that she's facing.
How much support is she getting at home? Is it creating a lot of publicity in the US?
So it's really interesting because had this been the male equivalent, had this been LeBron James or someone like that, this would be all over the news all the time. There's been some attention on this, but comparatively much less given her stature, given what a great basketball player. She's a two-time Olympian. She's an all-star. And some say, one of the greatest female basketball players of all time. There really has been not that much attention given the context here. Now, the WNBA, the Women's Basketball Association, has been trying to drum up more support and more interest because she's just vanished. I mean, there's been very little reporting on it. And so they're hoping to get more attention on this matter and to apply more pressure on Biden to do more.
Just finally, how do you think this will pan out for Brittney Griner?
I mean, it's really hard to say. If we go by what Secretary of State Tony Blinken says, then they're going to find a way out for her. But this could take months. And if the U.S. doesn't offer Russia what it wants, it's possible. I mean, she could be in prison for up to a decade, if not longer. That's even if she was acquitted, because there's just so many unknowns with dealing with the Russian legal system. But the U.S. is confident they're going to find a way out, so we may see her out by the end of the year.
Professor Natasha Lindstaedt, thank you.
Thanks for having me.